What if Rex rescued Anakin on Mustafar? Let's explore the depths of this scenario in the video. The molten rivers of Mustafar flow beneath the abandoned mining facility. As smoke rises from the volcanic landscape, the air shimmers with heat waves as chunks of volcanic rock drift on rivers of lava. The acrid smell of sulfur fills the atmosphere, while the distant rumble of volcanic activity creates an ominous backdrop. Obi-Wan Kenobi stands over his former apprentice, tears streaming down his face as he watches Anakin Skywalker burn on the black sand shore. The Chosen One lies broken, his limbs severed by his former master's lightsaber, his body consumed by flames that lick at his remaining flesh. His screams echo across the volcanic wasteland, a sound that will haunt Obi-Wan's dreams for years to come. Obi-Wan picks up Anakin's lightsaber with trembling hands, the weapon feeling heavier than it ever has before. This blade had once belonged to a hero, to the man who was supposed to bring balance to the Force. Now it represents only betrayal and loss. Obi-Wan clips it to his belt and turns away, unable to watch any longer as his former Padawan burns. He doesn't see the figure emerging from behind the volcanic rocks, moving with purpose toward the burning form of his former general. The figure moves carefully, using thermal imaging to navigate through the heat and smoke, his white armor reflecting the orange glow of the lava flows. Captain Rex had witnessed the horror firsthand, and the memories would be seared into his mind forever. When Order 66 was executed across the galaxy, Rex felt the familiar pressure in his skull as the inhibitor chip activated. The pain was excruciating, like a vibroblade being driven through his brain. For a moment, everything went white, and he felt his consciousness being pushed aside by something cold and mechanical. But something went wrong with the chip's activation sequence. The organic tissue around the device had been damaged during the Battle of Ringo Vinda when Fives had shot him with a stun blast. The chip sparked and malfunctioned, sending conflicting signals through his neural pathways. Rex found himself fighting against every instinct the chip tried to force upon him. He watched in mounting horror as his brothers turned their weapons on the Jedi they had served alongside for years. Commander Cody, his oldest friend among the clone officers, raised his blaster toward Obi-Wan without hesitation. The expression on Cody's face was blank, emotionless, as if someone else was controlling his actions, which, Rex realized with growing dread, was exactly what was happening. While Cody and the other commanders carried out their grim orders without question, Rex found himself fighting a war inside his own mind. The chip's programming screamed at him to eliminate the Jedi, to follow his orders without question. But his own consciousness, his memories and experiences fought back with equal determination. He thought of all the times Anakin had risked his life to save Rex and his men. He remembered countless battles where Jedi had died protecting clone troopers, treating them as brothers rather than expendable assets. The final straw came when Rex received the temple security recordings. He had managed to access the restricted files using his command codes, hoping to understand what was happening to the galaxy. What he saw made his blood run cold. The holo recordings showed Anakin Skywalker, now calling himself Darth Vader, leading the 500 and Honest Legion into the sacred halls of the Jedi Temple. Rex watched in disbelief as his general, the man he had followed through countless battles, cut down younglings who couldn't have been older than 10 standard years. The recording showed Master Sindralig, the temple's battle master, confronting Anakin in the main hall. Rex had met Dralig several times and respected the Jedi's dedication to training the next generation of peacekeepers. In the recording, Dralig activated his lightsaber and prepared to defend the children behind him. Anakin's response was swift and merciless. His blue blade, the same weapon Rex had seen him wield against separatist droids countless times, cut down the Jedi Master without hesitation. But it was what happened next that truly broke Rex's heart. Young Saw's Bandim, a boy Anakin had met during previous visits to the temple, approached his fallen hero with innocent trust. "Master Skywalker," the boy said, "there are too many of them. What are we going to do?" Anakin's response was to ignite his lightsaber. The recording cut off there, but Rex knew what had happened next. The betrayal cut deeper than any blaster bolt. But Rex couldn't bring himself to hate Anakin. Something was wrong. This wasn't the man who had risked everything to save Rex and his brothers time and time again. Rex remembered the Battle of Christophsis, when Anakin had disobeyed direct orders to rescue Rex and his squad from a separatist ambush. He thought of Ryloth, where Anakin had stayed behind to cover the evacuation of civilians while Rex led them to safety. This wasn't the same man who had spent hours in the medical bay, personally checking on wounded clones and ensuring they received the best possible care. Rex began to suspect that something had been done to Anakin. Some form of manipulation or control similar to what the inhibitor chips did to the clones. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that his general was a victim as much as the younglings he had killed. That didn't excuse what had happened, but it meant there might still be hope for redemption. Driven by loyalty that transcended programming, Rex made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He stole a Republic gunship from the temple hangar, using his command codes to override the security systems. Several clone troopers tried to stop him, but Rex stunned them with non-lethal settings, unwilling to kill his brothers, even as they followed their programming. The gunship's navigation computer had logged Anakin's last known trajectory, and Rex followed it to the Mustafar system. The volcanic world was a hellscape of molten rock and toxic gases. Rex's gunship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere, the hull groaning under the stress of extreme temperatures and corrosive winds. He followed the trail of debris from what appeared to be a damaged starfighter, leading him to the industrial mining facility, where the confrontation between Obi-Wan and Anakin had taken place. Rex arrived just in time to see Obi-Wan's ship departing from the planet's surface. The Jedi Master's vessel climbed slowly into the poisonous sky, its engines straining against the planet's crushing gravity. Rex felt a pang of sadness, knowing that Obi-Wan believed his former apprentice was dead. In a way, perhaps Anakin Skywalker was dead, but Rex refused to accept that the man couldn't be saved. Rex landed his gunship on the volcanic shore and immediately activated the ship's environmental systems. The air outside was toxic, filled with sulfur compounds that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. He donned his helmet and activated the sealed atmosphere system, then stepped out into the hellish landscape. The heat was overwhelming even through his armor's cooling systems, and he could feel sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Following his helmet's thermal imaging, Rex located Anakin's broken form, still smoldering from the lava's heat. The sight that greeted him was worse than anything he had seen during 3 years of galactic warfare. Anakin lay on his back, his body twisted at unnatural angles. Both legs were severed at the knees, the wounds cauterized by the intense heat. His left arm was gone completely, torn away during his fall into the lava. Severe burns covered most of his remaining flesh, and his hair had been singed away entirely. Most clones would have followed orders and finished the job, putting Anakin out of his misery with a quick blaster bolt to the head. But Rex wasn't most clones. This was his general, his friend, and despite everything that had happened, Rex couldn't abandon him. He activated his comlink and sent out a coded transmission on a frequency known only to him and a few trusted brothers. The message was simple: medical emergency, immediate assistance required, highest priority, working quickly. Rex activated the gunship's medical systems and began emergency treatment. The ship's medical bay was designed to handle battlefield injuries, but Anakin's condition was beyond anything in the standard protocols. Rex drew on his field medic training, knowledge gained from treating wounded brothers in countless battles. He started by administering emergency pain medication through an intravenous line, then began the delicate process of stabilizing Anakin's vitals. The cardiac monitor showed a weak but steady heartbeat. Though Anakin's blood pressure was dangerously low from massive blood loss, Rex activated the ship's Bacta synthesis system and began preparing emergency transfusions. The medical computer estimated that Anakin had lost nearly 60% of his blood volume, a loss that should have been fatal. Somehow, the Force was keeping him alive, though Rex could sense that the connection was tenuous at best. As Rex worked, his hands moved with practiced efficiency born from treating hundreds of wounded clones. He cleaned and dressed the major wounds, applied Bacta patches to the worst burns, and monitored Anakin's brain activity for signs of hypoxic damage. The young Jedi's midichlorian count was off the charts, higher than anything in the medical database, and Rex suspected that this was what was keeping Anakin alive despite injuries that would have killed anyone else. While the medical systems worked, Rex found himself talking to his unconscious general. He spoke about their shared experiences during the Clone Wars, the battles they had fought together, the brothers they had lost. He told Anakin about Fives and his investigation into the inhibitor chips, about how the clone had tried to warn them about the conspiracy that had destroyed the Republic. Rex found himself wishing he had listened to Fives more carefully, that he had taken the troopers' warnings seriously instead of dismissing them as paranoid delusions. After several hours of intensive treatment, Anakin's condition stabilized enough for transport. Rex carefully transferred him to the gunship's medical pod, a hermetically sealed environment that could maintain life support indefinitely. As they prepared to leave Mustafar, Rex made a decision about their destination. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere the Empire wouldn't think to look for them. Rex remembered an abandoned clone medical station on Rishi Moon, a facility that had been decommissioned after the battle there early in the war. The station still had functional medical equipment and was off all official Imperial registries. More importantly, it held significance for both Rex and Anakin. It was where they had first fought together against overwhelming odds, where they had learned to trust each other as soldiers and as friends. The journey to Rishi Moon took 18 standard hours, during which Rex never left Anakin's side. He monitored every fluctuation in the medical readings, adjusted medication dosages, and ensured that the life support systems maintained optimal conditions. Twice during the journey, Anakin's heart stopped completely, and Rex had to use the medical pod's defibrillation system to restart it. Each time, He wondered if he was prolonging suffering rather than providing salvation. As Imperial reinforcements began arriving in the Mustafar system, Rex engaged the gunship's stealth systems and slipped away into hyperspace. The ship's navigation computer plotted a circuitous route through several uninhabited systems, ensuring that their trail would be virtually impossible to follow. Rex carried the broken form of Anakin Skywalker to safety, not knowing what the future would hold, but determined to give his general a chance at redemption. Rex brought Anakin to Rishi Moon under cover of a fierce electromagnetic storm that masked their approach. The abandoned clone facility sat on a rocky outcropping overlooking a turbulent sea, its durasteel walls scarred by years of neglect and weather. Rex had visited the station several times during the war, using it as a staging area for covert operations in the Outer Rim. He knew every corridor and maintenance tunnel, every security protocol and emergency system. The facility's medical bay was more extensive than what was available on the gunship, with surgical suites, back-to-tanks, and advanced diagnostic equipment. Rex spent the first week essentially living in the medical bay, monitoring Anakin's condition around the clock and making incremental improvements to his treatment protocols. The clone captain had received extensive medical training during his service, but Anakin's injuries pushed his knowledge to its limits. The physical healing was only part of the challenge. Rex could sense through their bond, forged over years of shared combat and mutual respect, that Anakin was fighting a different kind of battle in his unconscious mind. Sometimes the young Jedi would cry out in his sleep, speaking names that Rex recognized. Padme, his secret wife whose death had triggered his fall to the dark side. Obi-Wan, the master who had been forced to cut him down. The younglings, whose innocent faces would haunt Anakin's dreams for the rest of his life. Rex began talking to Anakin during these episodes, sharing stories from their time together during the Clone Wars. He spoke about the Battle of Christophsis, where they had first met, and where Anakin had immediately treated the clones as individuals rather than expendable assets. He recalled their mission to Ryloth, where Anakin had risked court-martial to save civilian refugees. Rex told Anakin about all the lives he had saved, all the good he had done during the war, hoping that these positive memories might help counteract the darkness that had consumed him. The third week brought the first signs of consciousness. Anakin's eyes began moving beneath his closed lids, and his vital signs showed increased activity during certain hours of the day. Rex adjusted the medication to allow for a gradual return to awareness, knowing that the psychological shock of awakening might be as dangerous as the physical trauma. When Anakin finally opened his eyes on the 21st day after Mustafar, the yellow Sith eyes that had burned with hatred and rage had faded back to their natural blue. The first thing he saw was Rex sitting beside his medical bed, the clone captain's face etched with exhaustion and worry. Rex had barely slept during the 3 weeks of Anakin's unconsciousness, catching only brief naps between medical procedures and system checks. Anakin tried to speak, but his voice came out as a raspy whisper, his throat raw from the breathing tube that had sustained him. "Rex," he managed to say, his eyes wide with confusion and something that might have been relief. "What happened? Where are we? More importantly, why did you save me? Do you know what I've done?" Rex leaned forward, his expression a mixture of pain and determination. The clone captain had rehearsed this conversation in his mind hundreds of times over the past 3 weeks. But now that the moment had arrived, the words seemed inadequate. "I know what you did, General," he said quietly. "I saw the temple recordings. I know about the younglings, about Master Windu, about everything that happened that night." Anakin's face crumpled with shame and self-hatred, tears streaming down his scarred cheeks. The memories of that terrible night came flooding back with crystal clarity. He remembered the feeling of his lightsaber cutting through young Saw's Bandim, the trust in the boy's eyes turning to confusion, and then to nothing. He remembered Master Sindralig's final words, a plea for mercy that had fallen on deaf ears. Most of all, he remembered the satisfaction he had felt in those moments, the dark joy that had filled him as he embraced his hatred. "Then why, Rex?" Anakin whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "Why didn't you let me burn? Why didn't you finish what Obi-Wan started? I'm a monster. I killed children. I betrayed everything the Jedi stood for. I don't deserve to live after what I've done." Rex was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because you saved my life more times than I can count," he said finally. "Because you treated us clones like human beings when everyone else saw us as expendable. Because you risked everything to protect innocent people over and over again. Because I've seen who you really are, Anakin. And that man is worth saving, even if you can't see it right now." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult either of them had ever experienced. Anakin confessed everything about his fall to the dark side, holding nothing back. He told Rex about his marriage to Padme, kept secret from the Jedi Council for 3 years. He described the nightmares that had plagued him for months, visions of Padme dying in childbirth that felt more real than his waking life. He explained how Palpatine had slowly manipulated him over the years, offering forbidden knowledge and playing on his fears and insecurities. Rex listened without judgment, though the clone captain's jaw tightened when Anakin described his encounter with Mace Windu in Palpatine's office. The revelation that the Chancellor was actually Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord who had orchestrated the entire war, explained so much about how the conflict had unfolded. Rex thought about all the times their missions had seemed suspiciously well informed, all the instances where they had arrived at the perfect moment to achieve maximum strategic impact. "I should have seen it," Anakin said, his voice hollow with regret. All the signs were there. The way he always knew exactly what to say to manipulate me. The way he turned me against the Council made me believe they were plotting against him. I was so desperate to save Padme that I ignored everything that should have warned me about what he really was. Rex reached out and placed a hand on Anakin's shoulder, careful not to aggravate his injuries. "The Sith are masters of deception, General. They've had 1,000 years to perfect their techniques. You weren't the first good man to be corrupted by their lies, and you won't be the last. But you can choose to be something different now." Anakin struggled with overwhelming guilt and self-hatred in the days that followed. There were moments when he begged Rex to just kill him, to end the pain and suffering he had caused. The weight of his crimes seemed unbearable, and he couldn't understand why Rex continued to care for him with such dedication. The clone captain brought him meals, helped him with physical therapy exercises, and continued to share stories from their time together during the war. But Rex refused to give in to Anakin's despair. The clone captain had seen too much death during the war, had lost too many brothers to senseless violence. He wasn't about to lose another friend, especially not to suicide born from guilt and shame. Instead, Rex stayed by Anakin's side as he recovered physically and mentally from his trauma, offering support without judgment and hope without false promises. "Do you remember when we were trapped on Ryloth?" Rex asked one evening, as they sat, watching the sunset through the medical bay's viewport. There was that little Twi'lek girl, couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her village had been destroyed by separatist droids, and she was hiding in the ruins when we found her. Anakin nodded slowly, the memory surfacing through the haze of pain and medication. "Numa," he said quietly. "Her name was Numa. She gave me her Tuka doll because she said I looked sad." "That's right," Rex said with a small smile. "You carried that doll in your pack for months afterward because you said it reminded you why we were fighting. That's who you are, Anakin. Not the monster Palpatine made you into, but the man who would carry a child's toy across the galaxy because it represented hope and innocence." As the weeks passed, Rex began to see glimpses of the man Anakin had been before his fall. The young Jedi still carried tremendous guilt for his crimes, but he was beginning to channel that remorse into determination rather than despair. He spoke about wanting to make amends, to somehow balance the scales for the lives he had taken. Rex encouraged these thoughts while being careful not to push too hard or too fast. The clone captain also began working on practical matters. Anakin's injuries had left him permanently disabled, requiring prosthetic limbs to regain mobility. Rex wasn't an expert in cybernetic technology, but he had access to the medical station's fabrication equipment and enough engineering knowledge to create basic replacements. The prosthetics he designed were simple but functional, focusing on utility rather than aesthetics. Unlike the painful cybernetic suit that Palpatine would have eventually provided for Darth Vader, Rex's prosthetics were designed for comfort and functionality. He incorporated pressure sensors and neural feedback systems that would allow Anakin to feel sensations through the artificial limbs. The power systems were efficient and quiet, drawing minimal energy from Anakin's natural bioelectric field. The most challenging aspect was creating a respiratory system to replace Anakin's damaged lungs. The volcanic gases on Mustafar had caused severe damage to his respiratory tract, requiring artificial assistance for normal breathing. Rex designed a compact system that could be concealed beneath clothing, unlike the intimidating mask and chest panel that would have defined Vader's appearance. As Anakin healed and adapted to his new prosthetics, Rex began broaching the subject of their future. They couldn't remain hidden on Rishi Moon indefinitely. Eventually, Imperial forces would expand their search patterns and discover their refuge. More importantly, Rex believed that Anakin needed a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The young Jedi was tormented by guilt over his past actions, and the only way to find peace would be through positive action in the present. Together, they began planning their next move. Anakin's intimate knowledge of Imperial operations and Palpatine's plans made him invaluable to any resistance movement. He knew ship designs, troop deployment patterns, communication protocols, and most importantly, he understood how the Emperor thought. Rex suggested they begin quietly undermining Imperial operations, starting small, but building towards something larger. Their first objective would be rescuing other clones whose inhibitor chips had malfunctioned or been damaged. Rex had compiled a list of brothers who had shown signs of independent thought or resistance to Order 66, clones who might be sympathetic to their cause if approached carefully. Using stolen Imperial codes that Anakin provided, they could potentially infiltrate clone facilities and begin secretly removing chips from willing volunteers. The idea appealed to Anakin on multiple levels. It would allow him to strike back against the Empire that had used him as a weapon, while also helping to free men who were essentially slaves to their programming. More importantly, it would give him a chance to do something genuinely good, to save lives rather than take them. Their first mission was targeting Commander Wolf, whose chip had been partially damaged during a battle on Selos. According to Rex's intelligence network, Wolf was hiding in an abandoned Republic base in the Outer Rim. Consumed by guilt over the Jedi he had been forced to kill. The commander had always been an independent thinker, and Rex believed he would be receptive to their message if approached correctly. Rex and Anakin spent weeks planning the mission, studying Imperial patrol patterns and identifying the best approach routes. They modified their gunship with additional stealth capabilities and forged Imperial authorization codes that would allow them to pass through checkpoints without arousing suspicion. Anakin's knowledge of Imperial procedures proved invaluable in creating documents that would pass even close scrutiny. The journey to Selos took them through several Imperial-controlled systems, requiring careful timing and flawless execution of their cover identities. They posed as Imperial technicians conducting routine maintenance on communications equipment, a story that explained their presence in restricted areas, while avoiding the level of scrutiny that would be applied to military personnel. When they finally reached Selos, they found Wolf living in the crashed Republic Walker, exactly as Rex's intelligence had suggested. The commander had been surviving on emergency rations and rainwater, too consumed by guilt and shame to seek proper shelter or medical attention. His appearance was haggard, his eyes hollow with the weight of what he had been forced to do. Wolf's initial reaction to seeing Rex and Anakin was hostile and suspicious. He drew his sidearm and aimed it at them, his hands shaking with exhaustion and emotional trauma. "You're supposed to be dead," he said to Anakin, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Both of you are supposed to be dead. Why are you here? Is this some kind of test?" Rex raised his hand slowly, showing that he was unarmed. "It's not a test, Wolf. We're here because we know what happened to you, what the chips made you do. We know about Order 66, about how they used us to betray the Jedi. And we know it wasn't really you who pulled the trigger." The conversation that followed was painful and difficult. Wolf described the moment when his chip had activated, the feeling of his consciousness being pushed aside by something cold and mechanical. He had watched helplessly as his own hands raised his weapon toward General Plo Koon, unable to control his actions or even speak a warning. The guilt and shame had been eating away at him for months, driving him to the edge of suicide. Anakin listened to Wolf's story with growing anger, not at the clone commander, but at the system that had used good men as weapons against their friends. He shared his own story of manipulation and fall, explaining how Palpatine had used his fears and emotions to turn him into a monster. The parallel experiences created an immediate bond between them, two victims of the same evil seeking redemption for crimes they had been manipulated into committing. Using the medical equipment aboard their gunship, Rex performed the delicate surgery required to remove Wolf's inhibitor chip. The procedure was risky, as the chips were designed to release fatal toxins if tampered with incorrectly. But Rex had studied the schematics extensively and developed techniques for safe removal based on his own experience and Five's earlier investigation. When Wolf awakened from the surgery, the change was immediately apparent. The hollow look in his eyes was replaced by clarity and determination. For the first time in months, he was truly himself again, free from the artificial programming that had defined his actions. The relief was so profound that he broke down and wept, overwhelmed by emotions that the chip had suppressed. Seeing Anakin alive and working against the Empire gave Wolf hope that redemption was possible for all of them. If the fallen Jedi could find a path back to the light, then perhaps the clones who had been forced to betray their friends could also find forgiveness. Wolf immediately volunteered to join their mission, offering his tactical expertise and knowledge of Imperial operations. Word began to spread through underground networks about a mysterious group helping clones break free from their programming. The reports were fragmentary and often dismissed as wishful thinking, but they reached clones who were struggling with the psychological aftermath of Order 66. Some called it impossible. Others whispered about clone defectors led by a fallen Jedi seeking redemption. Imperial intelligence took notice of these reports, but they were looking for large-scale rebel cells and organized military resistance. The idea that a small group of individuals could be operating effectively against the Empire seemed unlikely to their analysts. They focused their attention on more obvious threats, while Rex, Anakin, and their growing network continued their work in the shadows. Their next target was Commander Gregor, who had been reported killed during a mission to Abafar, but had actually survived with severe memory loss. Imperial records showed him listed as deceased, making him effectively invisible to their tracking systems. Rex had received word through his intelligence network that Gregor was working as a dishwasher in a cantina on Sullust, his memories slowly returning but his identity still hidden. The mission to extract Gregor was more complex than their previous operations. Sullust was an Imperial-controlled world with significant military presence, and the cantina where Gregor worked was frequented by off-duty Imperial officers. They would need to be extremely careful to avoid detection while making contact with their target. Anakin suggested using a subtle force manipulation to create a distraction, allowing them to speak with Gregor privately without arousing suspicion. Rex was initially hesitant about using force powers in such a public setting, but he trusted Anakin's judgment and agreed to the plan. The young Jedi had been practicing restraint and precision with his abilities, focusing on subtle influences rather than dramatic displays of power. They found Gregor exactly where their intelligence had indicated, working in the cantina's kitchen and showing no signs of recognition when they entered as customers. Anakin carefully extended his senses through the Force, confirming that this was indeed the missing clone commander beneath the damaged memories and altered appearance. The challenge would be awakening Gregor's true identity without causing a scene that would attract Imperial attention. Rex approached Gregor during a quiet moment in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry to the other workers. The conversation was carefully scripted to avoid triggering any mental defenses while gradually reintroducing concepts that might spark recognition. Rex mentioned specific battles and shared experiences, watching for any flicker of memory in Gregor's eyes. The breakthrough came when Rex mentioned their mutual friend, Captain Keeley, who had died during the defense of Ryloth. Something in Gregor's expression shifted, and he stopped his mechanical dishwashing motions. The name seemed to unlock a cascade of memories, and suddenly Gregor was looking at Rex with full recognition and growing excitement. "Rex," Gregor whispered, his voice filled with amazement. "You're alive! But how did you find me? And why aren't you following your orders?" The last thing I remember clearly was getting the transmission about Order 66. And then everything went dark. Rex quickly explained the situation, keeping his voice low while maintaining the pretense of a casual conversation. He told Gregor about the inhibitor chips, about how they had been used to turn the clones against the Jedi, and about his own escape from the programming. Gregor listened with growing horror as he realized what had been done to him and his brothers. The extraction from Sullust required careful timing and coordination. They waited until Gregor's shift ended, then followed him to his modest apartment in the Cantina's residential district. Anakin used the Force to disable the building's security systems, while Rex kept watch for Imperial patrols. The surgery to remove Gregor's chip was performed in the apartment's refresher, the only space with adequate lighting and privacy. Like Wolf before him, Gregor experienced an immediate transformation once the chip was removed. His personality became more animated and confident, the commander's natural leadership qualities reasserting themselves after months of suppression. He was eager to join their mission and contribute his specialized skills in demolitions and infiltration. As their network grew, Rex began to see the potential for something larger than simple rescue operations. They were building a core group of highly trained, motivated individuals with intimate knowledge of Imperial operations and clone psychology. More importantly, they were creating a symbol of hope for others who felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Anakin's knowledge proved invaluable when they began targeting Imperial installations directly. He knew which facilities were poorly defended, which officers could be bribed or intimidated, and which shipments contained critical supplies. Their raids were surgical strikes that maximized damage while minimizing casualties, a reflection of Anakin's commitment to avoiding the indiscriminate violence that had characterized his time as Darth Vader. The first Imperial facility they targeted was a supply depot on Ryloth, chosen specifically because of its symbolic significance. This was where Anakin had first learned to see the war's impact on innocent civilians, where he had begun to understand that the conflict was about more than military tactics and strategic objectives. The depot was also relatively lightly defended, making it an ideal target for their first major operation. The mission required extensive planning and reconnaissance. They spent weeks studying Imperial patrol patterns, guard rotations, and supply schedules. Anakin provided detailed intelligence about the facility's layout and security systems, while Wolf and Gregor contributed tactical expertise about the best approaches and escape routes. The actual assault was a masterpiece of precision and coordination. Using stolen Imperial codes, they gained access to the facility during a shift change when security was momentarily relaxed. Anakin used the Force to disable alarm systems and security cameras, while Rex and his team moved through the complex with practiced efficiency. The first time they encountered Imperials in battle, Rex worried that Anakin might fall back into his Sith habits. The young Jedi had spoken extensively about his commitment to redemption. But combat had a way of bringing out people's darker instincts. Rex watched carefully as stormtroopers opened fire on their position, ready to intervene if Anakin showed signs of losing control. Instead, he was amazed to see Anakin use the Force in ways he had never witnessed during the Clone Wars. Rather than using his lightsaber to cut down opponents, Anakin disabled their weapons with precise Force manipulations. Instead of using telekinesis to hurl enemies into walls, he created barriers that protected fleeing civilian workers. When Imperial reinforcements arrived, Anakin guided their escape routes away from populated areas rather than through them. The young Jedi fought with a restraint and precision that impressed even experienced warriors like Wolf and Gregor. His lightsaber work was defensive rather than aggressive, focused on protection rather than destruction. When forced to engage Imperial troops directly, Anakin used stunning attacks and disabling strikes rather than lethal force. The darkness was still there. Rex could sense it, but Anakin was consciously choosing the light with every action. Their success at the Ryloth depot sent ripples through Imperial command structures. The loss of supplies was significant, but more concerning were the reports of the raiders' methods and capabilities. Imperial analysts noted the surgical precision of the attack, the minimal casualties among their personnel, and the advanced knowledge of security protocols displayed by the attackers. More importantly, word of the raid spread through underground networks across the galaxy. Resistance cells that had been operating in isolation began to take notice of this new group that seemed capable of striking at Imperial targets with impunity. The raids became symbols of hope for oppressed populations, proof that the Empire was not invincible. Their growing network eventually attracted the attention of Senator Bail Organa, who had been quietly funding resistance cells across the galaxy. Organa's intelligence network had been tracking reports of clone defectors and Imperial supply raids, trying to identify the group responsible. When he learned that Anakin Skywalker was alive and working against the Empire, he insisted on a secret meeting to assess the situation personally. The encounter was arranged through intermediaries on Alderaan, with extensive security precautions to protect all parties involved. Organa arrived at the meeting accompanied by Captain Antilles and a small security detail. While Rex and Anakin brought Wolf and Gregor as backup, the atmosphere was tense, with both sides uncertain about the other's true intentions and capabilities. Organa's initial reaction to learning Anakin's identity was a mixture of shock, suspicion, and carefully controlled anger. "I've seen what you're capable of, Skywalker," he said, his diplomatic training barely concealing his emotions. The destruction of the Jedi Temple, the murder of younglings, the hunt for surviving Jedi across the galaxy. How do we know you won't fall again? How do we know this isn't some elaborate trap orchestrated by your master? Anakin met Organa's gaze steadily, understanding the senator's concerns and respecting his courage in confronting a former Sith Lord directly. "You don't know, Senator," he replied quietly. "All I can offer is my word and my actions. Judge me by what I do, not what I was. I can't undo the past, but I can try to build a better future. The children I killed can't be brought back, but perhaps I can save other children from suffering the same fate." Rex stepped forward, his voice firm with conviction that came from months of working alongside Anakin. "Senator, I've served alongside this man for 3 years during the Clone Wars. I've seen him risk everything to save a single clone trooper, to protect innocent civilians, to do what's right even when orders said otherwise. Yes, the Sith corrupted him, but that corruption is gone now. You want to know how? I'm sure. Because I'm still alive. If Anakin was still dark side, do you think he'd tolerate a clone questioning his decisions or challenging his authority?" The conversation continued for hours, with Organa probing their methods, motivations, and long-term objectives. He was particularly interested in their approach to Imperial personnel, noting that their raids had resulted in minimal casualties despite significant material damage. This restraint suggested a level of moral consideration that was inconsistent with Sith methodology. Anakin explained his philosophy about redemption and second chances, drawing parallels between his own fall and the situations faced by Imperial personnel who might be trapped by circumstances rather than ideology. Many stormtroopers and Imperial officers were simply following orders, much like the clones had been during Order 66. The goal should be to free them from their programming rather than simply destroy them. Organa's support opened new possibilities for their growing rebellion. With access to better resources and intelligence networks, they began planning larger operations with greater strategic impact. The Senator provided funding for equipment upgrades, intelligence about high-value targets, and connections to other resistance cells operating in different sectors. One of their most ambitious early operations was the liberation of a prisoner transport carrying captured Jedi and Force-sensitive individuals. Imperial intelligence had learned of several surviving Jedi who had been captured during recent operations, and they were being transported to a secure facility for interrogation and execution. The transport's route would take it through a relatively isolated system, providing an opportunity for intervention. The mission required careful coordination between multiple teams and precise timing to avoid civilian casualties. Rex and Wolf would lead a diversionary attack on the transport's escort vessels, while Anakin and Gregor infiltrated the prison ship itself to free the captives. The plan was complex and risky, with multiple points of potential failure, but the stakes were too high to ignore. When they intercepted the transport convoy, they discovered that one of the prisoners was Jedi Master Kakruk, a Wifid who had survived the initial purge but been captured during a failed rescue mission. Also aboard were several Padawans and a group of Force-sensitive children who had been identified by Imperial Inquisitors. The battle to liberate the transport tested all of their skills and coordination. Imperial escort vessels were better armed and armored than the Raiders' modified ships, forcing them to rely on superior tactics and intimate knowledge of Imperial procedures. Anakin's presence was crucial in neutralizing the ship's security systems and disabling the automated defenses that would have made rescue impossible. Master Kakruk's reaction to seeing Anakin was complex and emotionally charged. The Wifid had been present at the Jedi Temple during the Purge, though he had been in the archives rather than the main hall where most of the killings occurred. He had seen the security recordings and knew exactly what Anakin had done that night. "You," Kakruk said, his voice heavy with grief and anger. "You led the 501st into the temple. You killed Master Sindralig. You murdered younglings who trusted you. And now you expect us to trust you?" Anakin didn't try to defend his actions or make excuses. "I don't expect anything, Master Kakruk," he said quietly. "I know what I did, and I know it was unforgivable. I'm not asking for absolution or forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to save lives instead of taking them. These children deserve to live free, not die in Imperial prisons." The liberation of the prisoner transport marked a turning point in their operations. News of the rescue spread through both Imperial and Rebel networks, establishing their group as a significant threat to Imperial operations. More importantly, it demonstrated that even the Empire's most secure facilities could be penetrated and defeated by a small, determined force. The rescued Jedi and Force sensitives became valuable allies in their growing network. Master Kakruk, despite his initial hostility toward Anakin, recognized the strategic value of their operations and agreed to provide training and guidance to rescued Force-sensitive individuals. The Padawans contributed their knowledge of Imperial hunting techniques, and safe house networks. As word of their successes spread, other resistance cells began reaching out for coordination and support. A Twi'lek freedom fighter named Cham Syndulla requested their assistance on Ryloth, where Imperial forces were conducting brutal reprisals against civilian populations. Mon Mothma sent coded messages expressing interest in coordination between their operations and the emerging Rebel Alliance. Most surprisingly, they received a transmission from former Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano, who had been operating independently since leaving the Jedi Order before the Purge. Her message was brief and carefully worded, but it indicated that she was aware of their activities and interested in making contact. For Anakin, the possibility of reuniting with his former apprentice was both hopeful and terrifying. The arranged meeting with Ahsoka took place on a neutral world in the Mid-Rim, far from Imperial patrol routes and prying eyes. Rex accompanied Anakin to the meeting, both for security reasons and to provide moral support. The clone captain had served under Ahsoka's command during several campaigns and respected her judgment and capabilities. When Ahsoka's hologram appeared in their ship's communication array, Rex felt a surge of joy at seeing his former commander alive and well. She looked older and more experienced than when she had left the Jedi Order, with new scars and a harder edge to her expression. But her eyes still held the compassion and determination that had made her such an effective leader during the Clone Wars. "Sky Guy," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rex told me you were alive, but I couldn't believe it. After everything that happened, after what I learned about Order 66 and the Temple, how do I know you're really you? How do I know this isn't another manipulation?" Anakin's response was simple and heartfelt, drawing on their shared experiences and the bond they had forged during her time as his Padawan. "You don't know, Snips," he said, using the nickname that had always annoyed and endeared her. "All I can do is show you who I choose to be now. I can't take back what I did to the Temple, to the younglings, to the trust you placed in me, but I can try to make amends. If you'll let me." The reunion was emotional and difficult, with Ahsoka struggling to reconcile her memories of her former master with the knowledge of his fall and apparent redemption. Rex served as a bridge between them, sharing stories of their time together and the work they had been doing to fight the Empire. His presence helped Ahsoka see that while Anakin carried the scars of his darkness, he was genuinely committed to redemption. The first few days of their reunion were tense and awkward. Ahsoka found herself watching Anakin carefully, looking for signs of the darkness that had consumed him. She studied his interactions with Rex and the other clones, noting how he deferred to their expertise and genuinely listened to their concerns. This was not the behavior she would have expected from someone still touched by the dark side. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire on the moon where they had established a temporary base, Ahsoka finally voiced the question that had been troubling her. "Why didn't you come looking for me, Sky Guy?" she asked quietly. "After you fell, after you became Vader, why didn't you hunt me down like you did the other Jedi?" Anakin was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames as he considered his answer. "Because part of me, even in my darkest moments, remembered what you meant to me," he said finally. "You were the one good thing I had done as a Jedi. I couldn't bring myself to destroy that, even when Palpatine ordered me to." Rex watched this exchange with growing understanding. He had wondered about the same thing, why Anakin had seemed to focus his hunting efforts on certain Jedi while ignoring others. Now he realized that even as Darth Vader, some part of Anakin's humanity had remained, protecting the people he cared about even as he destroyed everything else. The conversation continued late into the night, with Ahsoka sharing her own experiences since leaving the Jedi Order. She described the loneliness of operating without the support network she had grown accustomed to, the constant fear of discovery by Imperial forces, and the weight of survivors' guilt that came with being one of the few Jedi to escape the Purge. "I blamed myself for not being there," she admitted. "If I had stayed with the Order, maybe I could have prevented what happened. Maybe I could have seen through Palpatine's manipulation and warned the Council. Maybe I could have saved you." Anakin shook his head firmly. "No, Snips. If you had been there, you would have died with the others. Your leaving the Order might have been the Force's way of ensuring that you survived to help rebuild what was lost. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right choice, even when we can't see it at the time." Over the following weeks, their working relationship gradually evolved into something resembling their old partnership. Ahsoka's network provided access to intelligence about Imperial operations that had been beyond their reach. She had been tracking Inquisitors across the galaxy, trying to rescue Force-sensitive children before they could be captured and corrupted. Her knowledge of Imperial hunting techniques and Inquisitor capabilities made their rescue missions far more successful and less dangerous. Their first joint operation was a mission to Tatooine, where Imperial forces had detected a Force-sensitive child in the Mos Eisley Cantina district. The child, a young Twi'lek girl named Kasha, had been manifesting telekinetic abilities during moments of stress, attracting the attention of Imperial informants. An Inquisitor was en route to the planet, giving them a narrow window to extract the child before she could be captured. The mission held special significance for Anakin, as Tatooine was his homeworld and the site of many painful memories. Rex noticed his former general's tension as they approached the desert planet, the way his hands clenched and unclenched as they descended through the atmosphere. For Anakin, returning to the world where his mother had died was like revisiting the source of his fall to the dark side. They established a base of operations in the ruins of the Lars homestead, a location that held deep emotional significance for Anakin. The moisture farm, where his stepfather Owen and Aunt Beru had lived, was now abandoned, its buildings partially buried by decades of sandstorms. Anakin stood in the doorway of the home where he had once lived briefly as a young man, remembering happier times before the war had consumed his life. "This is where I brought her," he said quietly, speaking of Padme's visit years earlier. "We sat right here and talked about the future, about what we wanted our lives to be like after the war ended. I was so convinced that we could have everything, that the galaxy would somehow arrange itself to give us the perfect life we dreamed about." Rex placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, understanding the pain that these memories brought. "The past is important, General, but it doesn't define what comes next. We're here to save a child, to give her the chance for a future that the Empire wants to take away. That's what matters now." The rescue operation required careful planning and precise timing. Imperial forces had established checkpoints throughout Mos Eisley, and the Inquisitor's arrival was imminent. They would need to locate the child, extract her from a hostile environment, and escape the planet before Imperial reinforcements could respond. Ahsoka took point on the urban infiltration, using her experience with Imperial procedures to navigate the checkpoints and surveillance systems. Her disguise as a Togruta trader was convincing enough to pass casual inspection, while her Force abilities allowed her to sense Imperial presence and avoid patrols. Rex and Anakin provided overwatch from concealed positions, ready to provide covering fire if the operation went wrong. They found Kasha hiding in the cantina's basement, terrified and alone after her parents had been arrested by Imperial forces the previous day. The child was barely 6 years old, with the large eyes and tentacle-like head appendages characteristic of her species. When Ahsoka approached her, speaking in gentle tones and radiating calm through the Force, Kasha initially recoiled in fear. "It's okay, little one," Ahsoka said softly, kneeling to bring herself to the child's eye level. "We're here to help you. We're going to take you somewhere safe, where you can learn to control your abilities without fear." The extraction was complicated by the arrival of the Inquisitor, who had somehow detected their presence despite their precautions. The red-skinned Twi'lek woman emerged from an Imperial shuttle with a squad of purge troopers, her yellow eyes scanning the Cantina district with predatory intensity. Rex recognized her from intelligence reports as the Fifth Sister, one of Palpatine's most effective Jedi hunters. The ensuing battle was fought through the narrow streets and alleyways of Mos Eisley, with civilians scattering for cover as lightsabers clashed and blaster fire echoed off sandstone walls. Anakin engaged the Inquisitor directly, while Rex and Ahsoka worked to protect the child and establish an escape route. The fighting was intense and personal, with the Inquisitor taunting Anakin about his past failures and fall to the dark side. "You think you can escape what you are, Skywalker?" The Fifth Sister snarled as their lightsabers locked together. "You think these rebels will forgive you for the younglings you slaughtered? You're still the same monster you always were, just wearing a different mask." Anakin's response was calm and measured, his defensive style keeping her aggressive attacks at bay. "I know what I was, and I know what I did. But I also know what I choose to be now. Every child I save, every life I protect, is a step away from the darkness and toward the light." The battle continued across multiple rooftops and through abandoned buildings, with both combatants demonstrating exceptional skill and determination. The Fifth Sister was powerful and experienced, trained specifically to hunt and kill Jedi survivors. But Anakin had advantages that she lacked, including the support of allies who believed in his redemption and the wisdom that came from having experienced both sides of the Force. The turning point came when the Inquisitor attempted to use the Force to collapse a building onto fleeing civilians. Anakin immediately abandoned his offensive stance to protect the innocents, using his power to hold the structure together while people escaped. This act of selflessness created an opening that the Fifth Sister tried to exploit, but Rex was ready with covering fire that forced her to break off her attack. The mission ended with the successful extraction of Kasha and the elimination of the Inquisitor threat, though not without cost. Several buildings in Mos Eisley had been damaged during the fighting, and Imperial forces were sure to increase their presence on Tatooine in response to the incident. But a child's life had been saved, and another small victory had been won against the Empire's oppression. As they departed Tatooine with Kasha safely aboard their ship, Anakin found himself reflecting on how different this visit had been from his previous experiences on his homeworld. Instead of coming here to rescue his mother only to watch her die in his arms, he had saved a child from a similar fate. Instead of seeking revenge against those who had wronged him, he had chosen protection and mercy. The circle was not complete, but perhaps it was beginning to heal. Their successful operations began attracting attention from other resistance cells and sympathetic politicians. Mon Mothma reached out through encrypted channels, expressing interest in coordinating their activities with the emerging rebel alliance. Her message was carefully worded and transmitted through multiple relay points to avoid Imperial interception. But its meaning was clear. The rebels were ready to move beyond isolated cells and begin building a unified resistance movement. The meeting with Mon Mothma took place on Dantooine, in the ruins of an ancient Jedi enclave that had been abandoned for centuries. The location was chosen for its symbolic significance as well as its isolation from Imperial patrol routes. The fallen stones and overgrown courtyards served as a reminder of what the galaxy had lost when the Jedi Order fell and what they were fighting to restore. Mon Mothma arrived accompanied by a small delegation that included Bail Organa, whom Rex and Anakin had met previously, as well as several other senators who had maintained their opposition to Imperial rule despite increasing pressure and surveillance. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, with all parties recognizing the historical significance of this gathering. "Your operations have been impressive," Mon Mothma said, addressing the assembled group with the same diplomatic grace that had made her such an effective senator. "You've demonstrated that the Empire can be opposed, that their installations can be penetrated, and their agents defeated. But individual operations, no matter how successful, cannot overthrow a galactic government. We need coordination, unified command, and long-term strategic planning." Anakin listened to her proposals with growing interest and respect. Mon Mothma's vision extended far beyond simple military operations to encompass political, economic, and social dimensions of resistance. She spoke about winning hearts and minds, about demonstrating that the rebellion offered a better alternative to Imperial rule rather than simply opposition to it. Rex appreciated the senators' practical approach to the challenges they faced. Military victories were important, but they meant nothing without the political infrastructure to capitalize on them. The Clone Wars had taught him that wars were won through logistics, intelligence, and popular support, as much as through superior tactics and firepower. Their discussion continued for hours, covering everything from supply chains and communication networks to recruitment strategies and operational security. By the end of the meeting, they had established the framework for what would eventually become the Rebel Alliance, with different groups contributing their specialized capabilities to a unified effort. Anakin's role in this emerging alliance was unique and somewhat controversial. His knowledge of Imperial operations and psychology made him invaluable for strategic planning. But his past, as Darth Vader, created political complications that could not be ignored. Some potential allies remained skeptical of his redemption, while others worried that his presence might be used by Imperial propaganda to discredit the rebellion. The solution they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Anakin would continue to operate in the shadows, providing intelligence and tactical support without becoming the public face of the rebellion. His actions would speak louder than any proclamation, demonstrating through consistent behavior that he had genuinely changed. Meanwhile, figures like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa would handle the political aspects of building the alliance. Over the following months, their operations expanded dramatically in both scope and effectiveness. They began coordinating with resistance cells across dozens of star systems, sharing intelligence and resources while maintaining operational security through compartmentalized command structures. Rex found himself training rebel officers in tactical doctrine, while Anakin provided strategic analysis based on his intimate knowledge of Imperial capabilities. One of their most significant operations during this period was the liberation of the spice mines of Kessel, where thousands of Wookiee slaves had been forced to work in horrific conditions. The mission was proposed by Chewbacca, a Wookiee warrior who had contacted the rebellion through underground networks after learning about their previous successes. The operation to free the Wookiee slaves was personal for Anakin in ways that went beyond strategic considerations. During the Clone Wars, he had developed great respect for Wookiee culture and their fierce loyalty to their friends and families. The thought of these proud beings reduced to slavery by Imperial greed filled him with a cold anger that he had to consciously channel into determination rather than rage. Planning the Kessel operation required months of preparation and intelligence gathering. The spice mines were heavily defended by Imperial forces, including specialized units trained to handle large, powerful alien workers. The facility was also equipped with automated defense systems and a fleet of patrol vessels that could respond quickly to any disturbance. Rex developed the tactical framework for the assault, drawing on his experience with large-scale military operations while adapting to the unique challenges of fighting in underground mining tunnels. The plan called for simultaneous strikes on multiple objectives: the main processing facility, the slave quarters, the Imperial garrison, and the planetary defense grid. Anakin's contribution was equally important but more subtle. His knowledge of Imperial command structures allowed them to identify the key personnel whose elimination would cripple the facility's defense coordination. He also provided intelligence about the mine's layout and security systems, much of which had been classified even during his time as Vader. The assault began at dawn on the moon's artificial day cycle, with rebel ships emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. The element of surprise was crucial, as Imperial forces had grown complacent after years of unchallenged control over the system. The first wave of attacks focused on eliminating the patrol fleet and disabling the planetary defense grid. Rex led the ground assault personally, coordinating with Chewbacca and other Wookiee warriors who had volunteered for the mission. The fighting in the mine tunnels was brutal and claustrophobic, with Imperial forces trying to use the confined spaces to negate the rebels' numerical advantage. But the Wookiees' natural strength and intimate knowledge of the facility's layout proved decisive in the underground battles. Meanwhile, Anakin infiltrated the main processing facility with a small team of elite operatives. Their objective was to disable the automated systems that kept the slaves contained and controlled. The facility's command center was heavily defended, but Anakin's combination of force abilities and tactical knowledge allowed them to penetrate the defenses without triggering the alarm systems. The liberation of the Wookiee slaves was a moment of pure joy and triumph that reminded everyone involved why they were fighting. Hundreds of beings who had been trapped in horrific conditions for years were suddenly free, their roars of celebration echoing through the mine tunnels. Children who had been born in captivity saw the sky for the first time, while elders who had thought they would die as slaves found themselves able to return to their homeworld. Chewbacca's personal reaction to the successful mission was deeply moving for all involved. The Wookiee warrior had lost his family to Imperial slavers years earlier and had dedicated his life to fighting against their oppression. Seeing his people freed from bondage was the culmination of everything he had worked toward, and his gratitude to the Rebel Alliance was profound and lasting. The success at Kessel sent shockwaves throughout the Imperial hierarchy and established the rebellion as a credible threat to Imperial interests. More importantly, It demonstrated that the rebellion was fighting for liberation rather than simple destruction, winning them support from oppressed populations across the galaxy. But the Empire's response was swift and brutal. Palpatine, recognizing that conventional forces were insufficient to deal with this growing threat, authorized the acceleration of several secret projects designed to counter Force-sensitive opponents. The most significant of these was the Artificial Vader program, which had been developing in secret facilities since Anakin's disappearance from Mustafar. The first Artificial Vader emerged from the cloning facilities on Kamino after months of accelerated development and psychological conditioning. The being was created using genetic material recovered from Mustafar, combined with advanced cybernetic enhancements and Sith alchemy. Unlike Anakin, who had retained his humanity despite his fall to the dark side, this artificial being was designed to be the perfect weapon, powerful, obedient, and utterly without mercy or compassion. Intelligence about this new Imperial enforcer reached the rebellion through their network of informants and defectors. The reports were fragmentary and often contradictory, but they painted a disturbing picture of an artificially created being with Anakin's appearance and abilities, but none of his capacity for growth or redemption. When Anakin learned about the Artificial Vader project, he felt a chill of recognition and horror that went beyond simple strategic concern. The Empire had essentially created a twisted mirror image of himself, embodying all of his worst qualities while lacking any of the relationships and experiences that had ultimately led to his redemption. "This is what I would have become," he told Rex during one of their private conversations about the threat. "If you hadn't saved me on Mustafar, if I had survived to serve Palpatine completely, this is what he would have turned me into. A weapon without conscience, power without wisdom, destruction without purpose." Rex could see the psychological impact that this revelation was having on his friend. The Artificial Vader represented not just a tactical threat to their operations, but a fundamental challenge to Anakin's sense of identity and redemption. It forced him to confront the darkness within himself and the path he had narrowly avoided. The confrontation with the Artificial Vader came sooner than anyone expected when Imperial forces launched a coordinated assault on multiple rebel installations simultaneously. The attacks were clearly designed to overwhelm the rebellion's response capabilities and force them to abandon several key bases. The Artificial Enforcer led the assault on Lothal, which had become one of the rebellion's most important operational centers. The battle for Lothal became a defining moment for the entire rebellion, testing their coordination, resolve, and tactical capabilities against the Empire's most advanced weapons and strategies. Imperial forces arrived in overwhelming numbers, supported by new technologies specifically designed to counter Force users and veteran rebel tactics. Rex found himself commanding a desperate defense against impossible odds, coordinating clone and rebel forces against an enemy that included many of his former brothers. The psychological impact of fighting against other clones was devastating for many of the liberated troopers, who found themselves forced to fire on men who looked exactly like them. The Artificial Vader's presence on the battlefield was immediately apparent through its impact on both Imperial and Rebel forces. Imperial troops fought with renewed confidence and aggression when their new enforcer was present, while Rebel forces struggled to maintain morale in the face of what appeared to be their greatest enemy returned from the dead. Anakin's personal confrontation with his artificial replacement took place in the ruins of Lothal's capital city amid the devastation of the larger battle. The duel was as much philosophical as physical, a confrontation between what he had been and what he had chosen to become. The artificial being's fighting style was immediately recognizable as a perfected version of Anakin's own techniques, but without the restraint and wisdom that had come from his redemption. Every attack was designed to kill or maim, with no consideration for civilian casualties or unnecessary destruction. It was Anakin's power channeled through Palpatine's ruthless philosophy. "You are weak," the artificial Vader declared as their lightsabers clashed in the city's main square. "You had power beyond imagination, and you threw it away for sentiment and false morality. You could have ruled the galaxy, could have brought order to the chaos, but instead you chose to serve inferior beings who will never appreciate your sacrifice. Power without compassion isn't strength," Anakin replied, his defensive style keeping his opponent's aggressive attacks at bay. "It's just destruction waiting to find a target. I learned that from my friends, from people who refused to give up on me, even when I had given up on myself. You'll never understand that because you were never given the chance to learn it." The duel raged across multiple levels of the ruined city as the larger battle continued around them. Both combatants were evenly matched in terms of raw ability and tactical knowledge, but their approaches to combat reflected their fundamental differences in philosophy and purpose. The artificial Vader fought with cold efficiency and calculated brutality, using every advantage available to achieve victory regardless of the cost. Its attacks were precise and devastating, designed to end the fight as quickly as possible through overwhelming force. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no consideration for anything beyond the immediate objective of destroying its opponent. Anakin's style, by contrast, emphasized protection and restraint even in the midst of deadly combat. He positioned himself to shield fleeing civilians from the destruction, used defensive techniques that minimized collateral damage, and consistently chose options that preserved life whenever possible. His priority was not victory, but protection of the innocent people caught in the crossfire. The philosophical differences between them became most apparent when the artificial Vader attempted to use the Force to collapse a residential building onto fleeing families. The action would have given it a tactical advantage by forcing Anakin to choose between pursuing the attack and protecting civilians, but it also demonstrated the fundamental emptiness of power without conscience. Without hesitation, Anakin abandoned his offensive stance to protect the innocent people below. He used the Force to reinforce the building's structure while civilians escaped, leaving himself temporarily vulnerable to attack. The artificial Vader immediately pressed this advantage, launching a series of devastating strikes that would have killed anyone with less skill or determination. "This is why you will fail," the artificial being said as it pressed its attack. "You are weak because you care more about others than yourself. You prioritize their lives over your own power, their safety over your victory. That is the path to defeat and death." "That's where you're wrong," Anakin responded, weathering the assault while maintaining his protective stance. "Caring about others doesn't make me weak. It makes me strong. It gives me something worth fighting for, something worth sacrificing for. Power for its own sake is empty and ultimately self-defeating." The battle reached its climax when both combatants found themselves on the city's highest tower, with the larger conflict raging in the streets below. The artificial Vader had pushed Anakin to the edge of his abilities, demonstrating combat skills that matched or exceeded his own. But as the duel progressed, the fundamental difference in their motivations began to tell. The artificial being was fighting to win, to prove its superiority and fulfill its programming. But Anakin was fighting for something larger than himself, for the rebels counting on him, for the innocent people of Lothal, for the future of the galaxy itself. This sense of purpose gave him strength that pure power could never provide. The end came when Anakin chose mercy over victory, using a technique Obi-Wan had taught him years earlier to disable his opponent rather than destroy it. The artificial Vader fell to the tower's surface, its lightsaber deactivated and its artificial limbs sparking from the damage. For a moment, it looked up at Anakin with something that might have been confusion or even curiosity. "You could kill me," it said, its voice distorted by damaged vocal processors. "I am everything you were, everything you could be again. Why do you hesitate?" "Because you're not everything I was," Anakin replied sadly. "You're only the worst parts. The darkness without the light. The power without the love. Palpatine created you to be a weapon, but he couldn't give you the one thing that makes strength meaningful. The choice to be better than you were designed to be." The artificial Vader's destruction sent profound shockwaves through both Imperial and Rebel forces. For the Empire, it represented the failure of their most advanced weapon and a devastating blow to their psychological warfare capabilities. For the Rebellion, it proved that even the Emperor's greatest creations could be overcome through courage, compassion, and unity. More importantly, the victory demonstrated that Anakin's redemption was complete and genuine. He had faced the worst possible version of himself and chosen a different path, proving that his commitment to the light was stronger than any darkness in his past. The psychological impact of this demonstration resonated throughout the Rebel Alliance and beyond. As news of the victory spread across the galaxy, more systems began openly defying Imperial rule. The artificial Vader had been presented as invincible, the ultimate expression of Imperial power and technological superiority. Its defeat at the hands of a redeemed Jedi inspired hope in oppressed populations and fear in Imperial leadership. The rebellion that had begun with Rex's refusal to abandon his general was now growing into a galaxy-wide movement for freedom and justice. Planets that had submitted to Imperial rule out of fear began to see that resistance was possible and victory was achievable. The psychological shift was as important as any military victory in building momentum for the larger conflict to come. But all involved knew that the real test was yet to come. Eventually, they would have to face Palpatine himself, the architect of their suffering and the source of the galaxy's oppression. The Emperor would not allow his authority to be challenged without responding with everything at his disposal. The final confrontation came when Imperial intelligence located the main rebel base through an elaborate deception operation that had taken months to execute. Palpatine himself led the assault, commanding the largest Imperial fleet assembled since the Clone Wars, and accompanied by the full power of his dark side abilities. But this time, he wouldn't face a broken young man desperate to save his wife. He would face Anakin Skywalker, supported by friends who believed in redemption, guided by wisdom earned through suffering, and strengthened by the knowledge that some things truly were worth fighting for. As Palpatine's massive flagship emerged from hyperspace above the rebel base, casting a shadow across the planet's surface, Anakin felt Rex's hand on his shoulder. The gesture was simple but profound. a reminder of the bond that had saved him from the darkness and given him the strength to fight for something better. "We've got your back, General," Rex said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute loyalty, forged through years of shared struggle and mutual respect. "We've come too far to give up now." Standing beside them were Ahsoka, Kanan, Ezra, and dozens of other rebels who had joined their cause over the months and years of their campaign. But most importantly, there were the liberated clones, men who had broken free from their programming and chosen to fight for something greater than orders and regulations. They were proof that redemption was possible, that even the most dire circumstances could be overcome with friendship, loyalty, and hope. They represented the best of what the galaxy could become when people chose to stand together against oppression and tyranny. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed since the Clone Wars. Palpatine's assault fleet consisted of over 200 Star Destroyers, supported by countless smaller vessels and carrying hundreds of thousands of troops. The Emperor had committed virtually every available resource to this final confrontation, determined to crush the rebellion once and for all. The rebel fleet was vastly outnumbered, consisting of perhaps 30 capital ships and a few hundred fighters. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in determination, superior tactics, and the moral authority of their cause. Every rebel pilot knew that they were fighting not just for their own lives, but for the future of freedom in the galaxy. Rex found himself commanding the ground defense, while Anakin prepared for what everyone knew would be his final confrontation with his former master. The clone captain had spent years training rebel forces, and now all of that preparation would be put to the ultimate test. He established defensive positions throughout the rebel base, coordinated with fleet elements, and ensured that evacuation procedures were ready if the battle turned against them. The space battle began when rebel fighters launched a series of coordinated strikes against the Imperial fleet's command ships. Led by pilots like Wedge Antilles and other veterans of previous campaigns, the small craft darted between massive Star Destroyers, targeting shield generators and weapon systems with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Imperial landing craft began deploying ground forces on the planet's surface. Thousands of stormtroopers, supported by walkers and armored vehicles, advanced on the rebel positions with overwhelming firepower. But the rebels had learned from previous encounters and had prepared accordingly. The ground battle was fierce and chaotic, with both sides employing every weapon and tactic at their disposal. Rex moved between defensive positions, coordinating the response and ensuring that no single point was overwhelmed by the Imperial assault. His experience and tactical knowledge proved invaluable in maintaining cohesion among forces that included regular rebel soldiers, liberated clones, and alien volunteers from dozens of species. Ahsoka led a team of force-sensitive individuals in strikes against Imperial command posts, using her lightsaber skills and tactical knowledge to disrupt enemy coordination. She had grown tremendously since her days as Anakin's Padawan, developing into a formidable warrior and leader in her own right. Her presence on the battlefield inspired rebel forces while striking fear into Imperial troops who had been told that all Jedi were dead. Kanan and Ezra worked together to protect civilian evacuation routes, using their combined force abilities to deflect incoming fire and create barriers against Imperial advances. The bond between master and apprentice had grown strong over their years of training and combat, and they fought with a coordination that maximized their effectiveness against superior numbers. But the focal point of the entire battle was the inevitable confrontation between Anakin and Palpatine. The Emperor descended to the planet's surface in his personal shuttle, accompanied by his elite guard and radiating dark side energy that could be felt across the battlefield. His presence seemed to suck light and hope from the air itself, a manifestation of the corruption that had consumed him over decades of embracing the dark side. When Palpatine finally stood before the assembled rebel forces, his appearance was both familiar and shocking. The kindly Chancellor mask had been completely discarded, revealing the true face of evil beneath. His features were twisted by years of dark side corruption. His eyes burned with yellow fire, and his voice carried the weight of absolute malice. "So, my young apprentice," he said, his gaze fixed on Anakin with predatory intensity, "you have chosen to oppose me once again. How disappointing. I had hoped that your experiences on Mustafar might have taught you the futility of rebellion against your betters." Anakin stepped forward, his lightsaber ignited, but held in a defensive position. His stance was calm and centered, showing none of the anger or fear that had characterized their previous encounters. "I'm not your apprentice anymore, and I never was your student. You were my manipulator, my corrupter, but never my master. I've learned what true mastery means from people who care about something beyond their own power." The Emperor's laugh was cold and mocking, echoing across the battlefield like the sound of breaking glass. "You speak of caring, of love, as if these weaknesses were strengths. Look around you, boy. See how your compassion has led to destruction and death. Every rebel who dies today dies because of your misguided idealism." Rex stepped up beside Anakin, his weapon ready, but his expression resolute. "They die fighting for freedom, for the right to choose their own destiny. That's something worth dying for, something you'll never understand because you've never cared about anything except your own power." Other rebels began moving to flanking positions, but Palpatine seemed unconcerned by their tactical deployments. His confidence was absolute, born from decades of successful manipulation and the knowledge that he commanded power beyond their comprehension. He had destroyed the Jedi Order, corrupted the Republic into an empire, and survived every challenge to his authority. "Your loyalty is touching, clone," Palpatine said to Rex, his voice dripping with disdain, "but ultimately meaningless. You are all insects before the power of the dark side, specks of dust to be swept away by forces you cannot comprehend." The battle began when Palpatine raised his hands and unleashed a torrent of force lightning that split into multiple streams, targeting several rebels simultaneously. The attack was more powerful than anything he had demonstrated before, fueled by years of accumulated dark side energy and his rage at being defied by those he considered inferior. Anakin immediately moved to intercept the lightning, his lightsaber creating a defensive barrier that absorbed much of the energy. But the attack was too powerful and wide-ranging for him to stop completely. Several rebels were struck by the peripheral bolts, their screams of pain echoing across the battlefield. Rex and other rebel soldiers opened fire with every weapon they possessed, but their blaster bolts seemed to bend around Palpatine as if deflected by an invisible barrier. The Emperor's mastery of the Force had grown to incredible levels during his years of unchallenged rule, and conventional weapons appeared to have little effect on him. The Emperor then began to demonstrate abilities that went beyond anything previously witnessed. He lifted entire sections of the battlefield into the air, hurling massive chunks of earth and metal at his opponents with casual gestures. He created whirlwinds of debris that forced rebels to take cover behind whatever shelter they could find. More terrifying still, Palpatine began to drain the life force from the area around him, causing plants to wither and die while drawing their energy into himself. The very air seemed to grow cold and lifeless in his presence, as if hope itself was being consumed by his malevolent power. Anakin realized that conventional tactics would not be sufficient to defeat his former master. This was not simply a lightsaber duel between two Force users, but a battle between opposing philosophies and ways of life. He would need to draw on everything he had learned about the light side of the Force, about connection and compassion, to have any hope of victory. Closing his eyes for a moment, Anakin reached out through the Force to every ally on the battlefield. He felt Rex's determination and loyalty, Ahsoka's courage and wisdom, Kanan's dedication to his students, Ezra's hope for the future. He felt the resolve of rebel soldiers who had left comfortable lives to fight for freedom, the strength of liberated clones who had chosen to think for themselves. Drawing on these connections, Anakin found a power that Palpatine could never access or understand. It was not the power of domination or control, but the power of unity and shared purpose. Every person on that battlefield who believed in something greater than themselves became a source of strength for him. When Anakin opened his eyes and advanced on Palpatine, his presence on the battlefield had fundamentally changed. He no longer fought as an individual seeking personal victory, but as a champion of everyone who had ever chosen hope over despair, love over hate, freedom over tyranny. The lightsaber duel that followed was epic in scope and intensity, with both combatants demonstrating abilities that pushed the boundaries of what was possible through the Force. Palpatine's attacks were fueled by decades of accumulated rage and the absolute certainty of his own superiority. His movements were precise and devastating, each strike designed to end the conflict decisively. But Anakin's defense was perfect, guided not by his own skill alone, but by the collective will of everyone fighting beside him. He moved with a grace and purpose that transcended his individual abilities, his lightsaber seeming to be in multiple places at once as he deflected attack after attack. The battle raged across multiple levels of the battlefield, with both combatants using the Force to leap impossible distances and fight in 3 dimensions. They clashed on elevated platforms, in underground chambers, and even in mid-air as they used telekinesis to hurl themselves through space. As the duel progressed, the fundamental difference between their approaches became increasingly apparent. Palpatine fought with the assumption that power alone would be sufficient for victory, that his superior abilities would inevitably overwhelm any opposition. But Anakin fought with the knowledge that he was not alone, that his strength came from his connections to others rather than from domination over them. The turning point came when Palpatine, growing frustrated by his inability to achieve quick victory, made a crucial error. In his rage, he attempted to use the Force to kill every rebel on the battlefield simultaneously, channeling all of his power into a massive attack that would have devastated both friend and foe alike. Anakin intercepted this attack, but the effort required him to open himself completely to the Force, making himself vulnerable to Palpatine's direct assault. The Emperor immediately pressed this advantage, striking with all of his remaining power in an attempt to destroy his former apprentice once and for all. But as Palpatine's attack reached its crescendo, something unexpected happened. Every Force-sensitive individual on the battlefield, from Ahsoka and Kanan to young Ezra and the rescued children they had saved over the years, reached out through their connection to Anakin. and added their strength to his. The combined power of all these individuals, united in their commitment to protecting life and freedom, proved to be more than Palpatine could overcome. His attack was not only stopped, but reflected back upon him. The dark side energy he had channeled being transformed into something pure and cleansing. The Emperor's scream of rage and disbelief echoed across the battlefield as he felt his power being turned against him. For the first time in decades, Palpatine experienced doubt and fear, emotions he had thought himself beyond. The absolute certainty that had sustained him throughout his rise to power began to crumble as he faced a force he could not control or corrupt. In his final moments, Palpatine attempted one last desperate gambit. He tried to possess Anakin's body, to transfer his consciousness into his former apprentice, and continue his existence through that vessel. But he found that Anakin's mind was not empty or vulnerable as he had expected. Instead, it was filled with the presence of everyone who believed in him, everyone who had shown him love and loyalty and compassion. There was no room in Anakin's soul for Palpatine's corruption, because it was already occupied by something far stronger. The bonds of friendship, family, and shared purpose that connected him to the galaxy he had chosen to protect. The Emperor's spirit, finding no purchase in this foundation of light, simply dissolved into nothingness as Palpatine's physical form collapsed and his life force dissipated. The change across the battlefield was immediate and profound. Imperial forces, suddenly leaderless and uncertain, began to surrender en masse. Many had served the Empire out of fear rather than conviction, and with that fear removed, they had no desire to continue fighting. The victory celebration that followed was tempered by the knowledge of how much had been lost and how much work remained to be done. The galaxy had been scarred by decades of Imperial rule, and rebuilding would require years of dedicated effort from everyone who believed in freedom and justice. Rex found himself promoted to general in the new Rebel Alliance command structure, tasked with integrating former Imperial forces who wished to serve the cause of freedom. His experience with clone programming and rehabilitation made him uniquely qualified for this role, and his reputation as a leader who cared about his troops earned him immediate respect from former enemies. Anakin chose a different path, declining offers of official positions in favor of a more personal mission. Together with Ahsoka, he established a new Jedi Academy focused on teaching Force-sensitive individuals not just the traditional lightsaber techniques and Force powers, but also the importance of connection, compassion, and choosing the light even in the darkest circumstances. The Academy's curriculum emphasized practical application of Jedi principles in real-world situations, drawing on the lessons learned during their years of fighting the Empire. Students learned not just to fight, but to heal, to protect, to inspire hope in others, and to build rather than destroy. One of the Academy's first students was young Ezra Bridger, who had demonstrated remarkable potential during the final battle. Under Anakin and Ahsoka's guidance, he grew into a powerful and wise Jedi Knight, eventually establishing his own school on Lothal to serve the Outer Rim territories. Kasha, the young Twi'lek girl they had rescued from Tatooine, also became one of their most promising students. Her natural empathy and healing abilities made her particularly suited to the Academy's emphasis on using the Force to help rather than harm. She eventually became a renowned healer, traveling throughout the galaxy to aid communities recovering from Imperial oppression. The liberated clones found various paths in the post-Imperial galaxy. Some, like Rex, chose to continue their military careers in service to the new republic that emerged from the rebel alliance. Others pursued civilian occupations they had never been allowed to explore during their time as soldiers. Wolfe established a training program for former Imperial personnel who wished to integrate into Republic forces, drawing on his own experience of breaking free from programming to help others make the transition. His work proved invaluable in preventing the emergence of Imperial remnant forces that might have continued the conflict for years. Gregor became an instructor at the New Republic's military academy, teaching specialized tactics and demolitions to a new generation of soldiers who would never know the horror of programmed loyalty. His classes were among the most popular at the academy, as his enthusiasm and expertise made even the most complex subjects accessible to his students. The broader galaxy also began to heal from the wounds inflicted by Imperial rule. Planets that had been strip-mined for resources began to recover their ecosystems. Species that had been enslaved or oppressed started to rebuild their cultures and governments. Trade routes that had been controlled by Imperial interests opened up to independent merchants and smaller companies. Mon Mothma became the first Chancellor of the New Republic, bringing to the position the same diplomatic skills and moral authority that had made her such an effective leader of the rebellion. Under her guidance, the new government established principles of representation, individual rights, and systemic checks against the concentration of power that had enabled Palpatine's rise. But perhaps the most important legacy of the rebellion was the proof that redemption was possible, that even those who had fallen furthest could find their way back to the light if they were willing to accept help and make better choices. This principle became a cornerstone of the New Republic's justice system and social policies. The story of Anakin Skywalker's fall and redemption became a powerful symbol throughout the galaxy, inspiring countless individuals to examine their own lives and choose hope over despair, connection over isolation, love over fear. His journey from hero to villain to hero again demonstrated that no one was beyond salvation if they were willing to accept responsibility for their actions and commit to being better. Rex's role in this transformation was equally important and equally inspiring. The clone captain's refusal to abandon his friend, even in the darkest circumstances, showed that loyalty and compassion could overcome even the most powerful forces of evil. His example encouraged others to stand by their principles and support those in need, regardless of the personal cost. Years later, when historians wrote about the fall of the Empire and the restoration of freedom to the galaxy, they would identify many turning points and crucial moments. But those closest to the events knew that it all truly began on the burning shores of Mustafar, when a clone captain looked at his fallen general and chose compassion over duty, love over orders, hope over despair. That single act of loyalty and courage rippled outward through space and time, touching countless lives and ultimately reshaping the destiny of the galaxy itself. It proved that even in the darkest circumstances, the choice to do good, to care for others, to refuse to give up on those we love, can change everything. The lesson of Rex and Anakin's story resonated far beyond their own lifetimes, inspiring generation after generation to choose the light even when surrounded by darkness, to extend compassion even to those who seemed beyond redemption, and to never underestimate the power of simple human decency to transform the universe. In the end, the galaxy was saved not by superior weapons or overwhelming force, but by the fundamental recognition that every being deserved dignity, respect, and the chance to choose their own path. This principle born from the ashes of Mustafar and nurtured through years of struggle and sacrifice, became the foundation for a new age of peace and prosperity that would endure for generations to come. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. During one such mission to Lothal, they encountered a young boy named Ezra Bridger, who had been using the Force instinctively to survive on the streets. Imperial forces were closing in on him when Anakin, Rex, and Ahsoka intervened, leading to a running battle through the planet's capital city. The rescue operation brought them into contact with the crew of the Ghost, led by Kanan Jarrus, a Jedi Knight who had survived Order 66. Kanan's initial reaction to learning Anakin's identity was hostile and suspicious. "You're Darth Vader," he said, his lightsaber half-drawn and his stance defensive. "You killed younglings at the temple. You hunted down Jedi across the galaxy. You're the reason most of us are dead." Rex stepped between them, his hand resting on his blaster and his voice calm but firm. "That's not who he is anymore, Kanan. I've seen him risk everything to save innocent people. I've seen him choose mercy over vengeance time and time again. I've seen him use his power to protect rather than destroy." Anakin himself remained calm in the face of Kanan's anger, understanding the Jedi's reaction and respecting his right to be suspicious. "He's right to be suspicious, Rex," Anakin said quietly. "I did those things. I became a monster, and the fact that I was manipulated doesn't excuse my actions. If Master Jarrus wants to take me into custody or even try to kill me, I won't resist." I understand his anger. The confrontation was diffused when young Ezra, sensing the conflict through the Force, spoke up with the directness and honesty that only children possess. "I can feel both of you through the Force," he said, looking between Anakin and Kanan with wide, curious eyes. "There's darkness in him, yes, but there's light too, and the light is stronger now." Over time, their various networks began to coalesce into something resembling a true rebellion. Anakin's strategic knowledge proved invaluable in planning operations against Imperial targets, while his understanding of Palpatine's psychology helped them anticipate Imperial responses and stay one step ahead of their pursuers. More importantly, his presence served as a symbol of hope for others who had fallen and sought redemption. The Empire's response to their growing activities was swift and brutal. Palpatine, learning of his former apprentice's survival and rebellion, dispatched his most capable agents to deal with the problem. The Emperor was particularly concerned about the psychological impact of Anakin's redemption on Imperial morale and rebel recruitment. If the galaxy learned that even Darth Vader could return to the light, it might inspire others to resist Imperial rule. The first serious Imperial counter-operation came when they attempted to rescue a group of Force-sensitive children from a processing facility on Kessel. The mission appeared routine based on their intelligence, but it was actually an elaborate trap designed to capture or kill the rebel leadership. Imperial forces led by an Inquisitor had been waiting in ambush, supported by specialized clone troopers who had been programmed specifically to hunt Jedi. The battle at Kessel was their most serious engagement yet, testing all of their skills and coordination against a prepared and determined enemy. The Inquisitor, a former Jedi named Barriss Offee who had been corrupted and twisted by Imperial conditioning, proved to be a formidable opponent who knew many of their tactics and capabilities. Anakin's confrontation with Barriss was particularly emotionally charged, as she had been Ahsoka's friend during their time at the Jedi Temple. Seeing what she had become, the way Imperial conditioning had twisted her into a weapon against her former allies, reinforced Anakin's understanding of how easily good people could be corrupted by the dark side. "You think you're free?" Barriss taunted as their lightsabers clashed in the facility's main corridor. "You think you've escaped the darkness and found redemption, but you're still a killer, Skywalker. You still carry the mark of what you've done, and it will never leave you." Anakin didn't deny her words, but neither did he let them break his concentration. "You're right," he replied, his defensive style keeping her aggressive attacks at bay. "I'll never be free of what I've done, but I can choose what I do next. I can choose to save lives instead of taking them. I can choose to build instead of destroy." The duel continued through multiple levels of the facility as evacuation procedures continued around them. Rex and the other clones worked to extract the captured children, while Ahsoka and Kanan dealt with Imperial reinforcements. The battle was complicated by the need to protect innocent lives while fighting in a confined space filled with hazardous mining equipment. The turning point came when Barriss attempted to use the Force to collapse part of the facility's ceiling onto fleeing prisoners. Without hesitation, Anakin redirected her attack, catching the falling debris and gently lowering it to the ground. The effort left him momentarily vulnerable, and Barriss's blade grazed his prosthetic arm, sending sparks flying. "You're weak," she sneered, pressing her advantage. "You could have let them die and maintained your tactical position. That's what I would have done. That's what you would have done. As Vader. That's why you'll lose," Anakin responded, renewing his defensive stance with calm determination. The dark side is powerful, but it's also self-defeating. It consumes everything it touches, including its wielders. I learned that too late to save myself the first time, but I won't make that mistake again. In the end, Anakin disarmed Barriss rather than killing her. Using a technique Obi-Wan had taught him during their training sessions years ago. As Imperial reinforcements closed in and evacuation procedures neared completion, he made one final offer to his fallen opponent. "Come with us, Barriss," he said, extending his hand toward her. "You don't have to serve them anymore. There's another way, a path back to the light. I know it's possible because I've walked it myself." For a moment, something flickered in Barriss's eyes. Perhaps remembering who she used to be before Imperial conditioning had twisted her into a weapon. But the moment passed, and she reached for a thermal detonator concealed in her robes. "If I can't serve the Empire, then I'll die for it," she declared with fanatical determination. Rex tackled Anakin behind a Durasteel support beam as the explosion rocked the facility. When the smoke cleared, they found Barriss's body among the wreckage, her face peaceful in death, despite the violence of her final moments. Anakin knelt beside his fallen colleague, gently closing her eyes in a final gesture of respect. "I'm sorry, Barriss," he whispered, his voice heavy with grief for another friend lost to darkness. "I'm sorry we couldn't save you. I'm sorry the Empire took another good person and turned them into a weapon." The Kessel mission was ultimately successful, with the rebels rescuing 37 Force-sensitive children and significant intelligence about Imperial operations. But the encounter with Barriss had shaken Anakin deeply, forcing him to confront the reality that not everyone who fell to the dark side could be saved. Some had been too deeply corrupted, too thoroughly broken by Imperial conditioning to find their way back. The incident also demonstrated the Empire's willingness to use former Jedi against their own people, twisting their knowledge and abilities into weapons of oppression. This realization strengthened the rebels' resolve to strike at the heart of the Imperial system rather than simply reacting to its symptoms. Over the following months, their operations expanded in scope and ambition. They began targeting Imperial training facilities where Force-sensitive children were being indoctrinated, disrupting Inquisitor operations across multiple sectors, and providing support to other rebel cells struggling against Imperial oppression. Each mission brought new allies and new intelligence about the Empire's structure and weaknesses. News of their success spread through rebel networks, and soon they were contacted by resistance cells across the galaxy. The emerging rebel alliance, still in its formative stages, began reaching out for coordination and mutual support. Leaders like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa saw the strategic value of having former Imperial assets working against the Empire from within. But perhaps more importantly, word of Anakin's redemption began to spread through Imperial ranks as well. Stories circulated of the fallen Jedi who had returned to the light, leading some Imperial personnel to question their own loyalties and the morality of their actions. Defection rates began to increase, particularly among personnel who had joined the Empire for idealistic reasons rather than personal ambition. The Emperor's response to these developments was characteristically brutal and comprehensive. Palpatine ordered a massive expansion of the Inquisitor program, drawing on the ranks of captured Jedi and Force-sensitive individuals to create an army of dark side assassins. He also began developing new weapons and technologies specifically designed to counter Force users, including specialized restraints and suppression devices. Most significantly, Palpatine began working on a project to create a new enforcer to replace the Anakin Skywalker he had lost. Using genetic material recovered from Mustafar and advanced cloning technology, Imperial scientists began developing artificial beings with Anakin's power, but without his capacity for independent thought or moral consideration. The first of these artificial enforcers emerged from the Imperial facility on Kamino after months of accelerated development and conditioning. The being that emerged bore a superficial resemblance to Anakin, but was fundamentally different in crucial ways. This artificial Vader had been programmed with tactical knowledge and combat abilities, but lacked the emotional connections and moral framework that had ultimately led to Anakin's redemption. When reports reached the rebels about this new Imperial enforcer, Anakin felt a chill of recognition and horror. Through their intelligence networks, they learned that the Empire had created a twisted version of himself, a being with his face and abilities, but none of his humanity. The implications were terrifying, both for what it revealed about Imperial capabilities and for what it might mean for their ongoing operations. The confrontation with this artificial Vader came sooner than expected when Imperial forces launched a massive assault on Lothal, the rebels' primary base of operations. The attack was led personally by the artificial enforcer, supported by a full Imperial fleet and thousands of specialized troops trained specifically to fight Force users. The battle for Lothal became a defining moment for the Rebel Alliance, testing their coordination, resolve, and tactical capabilities against the Empire's most advanced weapons and strategies. Rex found himself commanding clone and rebel forces against an enemy that included many of his former brothers, creating moral and emotional complications that challenged his leadership abilities. Anakin's personal duel with his artificial replacement was as much philosophical as physical. a confrontation between what he had been and what he had chosen to become. The artificial Vader possessed all of his combat abilities and strategic knowledge, but lacked the wisdom that came from genuine struggle and growth. "You are weak," the artificial Vader declared as their lightsabers clashed in the ruins of Lothal's capital city. "You had power beyond imagination, and you threw it away for sentiment and false morality. Power without compassion isn't strength," Anakin replied, his defensive style keeping his opponent's aggressive attacks at bay. "It's just destruction waiting to happen. I learned that from my friends, from people who refused to give up on me, even when I had given up on myself." The duel raged through multiple locations as the larger battle continued around them. Both combatants were evenly matched in terms of raw ability, but their approaches to combat reflected their fundamental differences. The artificial Vader fought with cold efficiency and tactical precision, while Anakin's style emphasized protection and restraint even in the midst of deadly combat. Rex and the other rebels provided support from a distance, but this was ultimately a battle Anakin had to face alone. The artificial Vader represented everything he could have become under different circumstances, a path he had avoided only through the intervention of friends who refused to abandon him. The battle ended when Anakin chose mercy over victory, using a defensive technique to disable his opponent rather than destroy him. Looking down at the broken form of what he might have become, Anakin felt a profound sense of gratitude for the clone captain who had refused to abandon him on the burning shores of Mustafar. "Your master created you to be everything I was, but he couldn't give you everything I am," Anakin said to his defeated opponent. "He couldn't give you the capacity to choose, to grow, to become something better than what you were designed to be." The artificial Vader's defeat sent shockwaves through the Imperial hierarchy, demonstrating that even the Emperor's most advanced creations could be overcome by the power of redemption and genuine human connection. More importantly, it proved to the galaxy that the Empire was not invincible, that its weapons and technologies could be defeated by courage, compassion, and unity. As news of the victory spread, more systems began openly defying Imperial rule. The rebellion that had begun with Rex's refusal to abandon his general was growing into a galaxy-wide movement for freedom and justice. But all involved knew that the real test was yet to come. Eventually, they would have to face Palpatine himself, not as servants seeking power, but as free beings fighting for the right to determine their own destiny. The final confrontation came when Imperial intelligence located the main rebel base, and Palpatine himself led the assault. But this time, he wouldn't face a broken young man desperate to save his wife. He would face Anakin Skywalker, supported by friends who believed in redemption, guided by wisdom earned through suffering, and strengthened by the knowledge that some things truly were worth fighting for. As Palpatine's shuttle landed and the Emperor emerged, flanked by his crimson-robed guards and accompanied by a massive Imperial army, Anakin felt Rex's hand on his shoulder. "We've got your back, General," the clone captain said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute loyalty forged through years of shared struggle. Standing beside them were Ahsoka, Kanan, Ezra, and dozens of other rebels who had joined their cause. But most importantly, there were the liberated clones, men who had broken free from their programming and chosen to fight for something greater than orders and regulations. They were proof that redemption was possible, that even the most dire circumstances could be overcome with friendship, loyalty, and hope. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment the galaxy chose light over darkness, hope over despair, and love over fear. And it all began with a clone captain who refused to abandon his general on the burning shores of Mustafar, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty can change the fate of the entire galaxy. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.